But first, Australians are having a struggle right now when it comes to paying the bills. Now, this represents itself constantly as the refrain of cost of living, cost of living, cost of living. Now, this was something that the government was being marked down for. Then they decided to put an awful lot of money on the credit card. They ended up winning the election. Okay, story well told. But clearly one of the things that keeps going up is power bills. They are artificially kept low because of taxpayer money, again, on top of the $1 trillion in debt that this mob have been able to ring up. Part of why the power bills keep going up is because the private companies are having to spend billions of dollars in brand new technology to move from one system to a new system. None of this is breaking news. Why are you mentioning it at the start of the show? Because, as you know, there is an expectation that power bills will keep going up for the next 10 years. I told you this because this was some of the response of the power companies to the coalition's decision when it came to net zero. Australian households are set to struggle with rising power prices for the next decade, although there could be some much-needed relief in the long run, say the major energy bosses. Well, this has always been the argument. The cost of transition has been my single and sole significant concern with those who have been focused that exclusively Australia is able to solve the world's climate problem, despite the fact that we are 1% of global emissions, that all of this new technology was going to cost hundreds of billions of dollars at least, depending on when you ask the CSIRO. It's hundreds of billions or it's a trillion, depending on some green groups. You can start to push a number up between $1 and $2 trillion. Now, either private companies take that on board and take it off their profits, unlikely. They pass it on to customers, or there's money that is off budget that is being used to help subsidise this change. But the reality is that when we, the customer, have been promised a better time when it comes to power bills, the reality is that since this government supercharged the run on renewable energy, power bills have gone through the roof. And while clearly the failures were not enough to unseat a government at the last election, the reality is that there is a significant number of Australians, somewhere about 40%, that do struggle to actually pay their power bills. Now, we've talked about this before, and I talk about it a lot, about that I thought this was a compassionate country that would want to do something about more than 3 million households that run out of food each and every week. Well, reality is, while you may and I may, the majority of Australians don't, the government hasn't changed the amount of money that they give to these particular charities. And the big end of town, well, they, of course, either end up voting teal or they've got enough money to not notice what the power bill was last quarter. They don't care what it was compared to 2 or 3 quarters ago. And a perfect example of this was on show today in Canberra. Now, I'm sure the point is not meant to seem as cold-hearted as it ends up being, but the reality was that today the boss of the National Australia Bank dropped one heck of a clanger. Now, he has been in the job for about 18 months, and his remuneration is, according to the Australian newspaper, $7.6 million a year. Now, I am not somebody who will sit here and bash a bank, and I understand that when you are in control of a company that has literally billions of dollars at stake, one of the big four, that without these companies performing well, the Australian economy goes kaput. I get it. I'm not sitting here and sooking about how much money these people make. Good luck to them. That's what they can do. But what I find absolutely unbelievable is that this bloke, when talking about these issues today, seemed to say that we're a little too hung up on power prices. Now, again, for those that can afford to pay them, it's not that big an issue. But according to many a source, there are hundreds of thousands of people who find it hard to make ends meet, and the promise is that those ends get further away over the next 10 years. This is what he had to say today in Canberra. Have a look at this. Roll the tape. I think he hopefully will regret what he just said here, but we'll find out together.
There is too much of a debate, I think, around net zero and energy prices being incompatible with each other. And I strongly believe that is the wrong narrative. And that, again, back to what I've been saying all along, as a country, we need to do a much better job of getting energy to market, both renewable and natural gas, to help decarbonize the grid, get rid of the coal, and become the energy superpower that we should be. And that I believe we could have one of the world's lowest energy costs and deliver net zero and be a wonderful exhibit to the world that you can do both at the same time.
Pretty wild, right? Now, again, he seems to be part of a leadership class in our country that starts with the politicians earning more than a couple of $100,000, a Prime Minister earning more than $600,000, people working for major financial institutions, and just as there was big oil, there will be big wind and big solar. And there's a lot of money to be made in them hills. And if you are involved in the financial sector, perhaps he's trying to send, I don't know, what's the opposite of a smoke signal? That's, of course, too carbon intensive, but you know what I mean. A message to market that this is the greenest bank of all. I don't know. And while I know that banks will not rise and fall on the $5,000 or $10,000 that you may or may not have in a savings account, the reality is that a significant number of Australians have less than $1,000 in the bank. They are collectively a big amount of money, but major financial institutions, well, of course, they deal in the millions and billions. Again, good luck to this bloke for being able to rise to a position of corporate power. But the idea that, we focus too much on the power bill side of it. Well, that's easy if you don't have to worry about paying the power bills. But part of the responsibility of being able to be richly rewarded for the success in your career is to remember that there are others that are not as successful. It is in part why I talk about those people that run out of food. It is why you talk about homelessness. It is why you talk about people that are struggling with their bills. Now, it's not a new thing for people to talk about it in politics, but this seems to be the focus now the decision has been made in and around net zero and the opposition. Susan Lee, again, travelling the country, ramming home the message that power prices are a massive problem. And with a promise of power prices increasing for the next 10 years, maybe at some point in time, the little light will go off for the majority of voters, or at least enough voters, to understand that the government we currently have that keeps giving itself pay rises, that hangs out with the corporate class who couldn't care less about what the little people do, that at some point the majority of Australians will say, hang on, what are we doing this for? Oh, that's right, to host global climate conferences that'll cost $1 billion. Or for us to change 1% of global emissions. Susan Lee, in part today, was suggesting that there is one question and one question only worth asking the Prime Minister every day until he actually answers it. I agree. Have a go.
The main question the Prime Minister needs to answer: when are electricity prices coming down, Prime Minister? And every time our friends in the media have an opportunity to ask the Prime Minister or his ministers this question, they absolutely must. When are electricity prices coming down? Because remember, for 2 elections, the Prime Minister stood there and told all of us that electricity prices would be coming down by $275. In fact, they've gone up by $1,300.
Bloody oath. Susan Lee is on the show a little bit later tonight. Now, I often get asked about why doesn't Australia produce a Donald Trump-like figure or a Nigel Farage-like figure who would be able to rise to leadership in a country like ours and to be able to reset things as it has been done in the United States and the United Kingdom. Reality is, of course, both of those countries have optional preferential voting. And also in the case of the United Kingdom, it's first past the post. If that's the case, it'd be almost permanent Liberal governments, because we know Labor's only able to get there because of the preferences that they end up getting from everyone else, but most notably the Greens. But also, every now and then, and in putting this show together, I read a whole bunch of stuff that I disagree with, and I most days listen or watch shows with a very different perspective to mine, because I always want to see what else is going on. Are some people's antenna a little better focused than mine? I wouldn't suggest so, but you get my point. You've got to look around. A balanced media diet is what you have to do when you're trying to assess everything that's going on and present to you each and every night, because you've got a real life to lead, and I'll do that work for you. But the reality is that there are some questions being asked that something that is more likely to take over in a country like Australia are very left-wing figures. Economic populism that is being practiced by parts of the right in other parts of the world is going to be a little bit like a pendulum. It goes this way, it goes that way, it goes this way, it goes that way. And in the United States, there are some signs that what produced Trump is about to produce big changes in New York City with the mayor of whom they have just been elected, or a woman who will become old enough to run for the presidency in AOC. Put simply, will the hardcore mega lefties be the ones who end up leading the way in the next little while? Now, again, like it or dislike it, but I want to say well done to a bloke called Jordan Knight. He wrote an excellent piece at skynews.com.au today, and I look forward to having a chat to him on the show whenever he's got the time. Because data shows that an Australian Zoran Mandani is inevitable unless Conservatives in this country radically change course. Now, Jordan's thesis, as written, is not about being hardcore left and hardcore right. It's not about net zero, but it is about being able to talk to the country that is the one in existence as opposed to maybe the one that we grew up in, or maybe the one where the last time the Liberal Party had some political success. The last time they won a federal election, while it's a blink in all of our eyes because all of us go, Jesus, it's been 30 years since this and 20 years since that. Well, of course, the reality is 2019 is 6 years ago. There are more people under the age of 50 that vote in each and every election. There are more women that vote than men in each and every election. As I've told you before, one of my theses about how the Liberal Party went backwards over the past 2 elections is that 27 of the 28 seats that they have lost since the 2022 election, there were more women voting or more women on the electoral roll in each of those seats. And if all of them seem to produce the same result, well, obviously not all women this and all blokes that and all young people this and all older people that. The reality is that the country changes. It also changes when it comes to the types of qualifications. Long gone are the days when people are leaving school early instead because of teachers' unions and expectations of Gen X parents. The expectation is you must finish year 12, you must go on to university. Now, of course, I disagree with that being the only way to go, but that seems to be the prevailing way things go in Australia. And surprise, surprise, the more people that get a uni degree, the far left we go. But also the reality is, and I know that if you say this the wrong way, it's a multiple day scandal, but as Jordan wrote, that as it was with Zoran Mamdani, as it may be for certain politicians in this country about how you unlock the magic formula to win seats, to get your way to 76 seats. Because, of course, as hundreds of thousands of people join us each and every year, eventually they will become Australian citizens. And again, as I have said, for anyone who's half listening, it is not a conversation about the composition of our country, be it ethnically or racially. It is simply about immigration when it comes to pressures on the system. But as Jordan wrote today, and again, another reason why you should always check out what's happening at skynews.com.au, do it in the morning, do it in the afternoon, double check before you go to bed as you are watching us. Firstly, Australia, like New York City, has notably high foreign-born populations. Data from the Australian Bureau of Statistics shows that nearly 33% of Australian population is now foreign-born, which is one of the highest in the Western world. Data released in September by the Home Affairs Office reveals that in the 2024-25 financial year, more than 165,000 people from 190 countries became Australian citizens, granting them voting rights and access to public services. That number alone is enough to swing or solidify seats across the country and is set to continue each year. Absolutely correct. Which means the candidates of political parties need to look like the communities of which they seek to represent. The leaders of our political parties don't just have to do the courtesy visits to the multiple festivals that exists for minority or majority communities, depending on which part of Australia that you live in. People like a Zoran Mamdani or people like an AOC, well, they're able to speak more than one language. One of the apparent secret superpowers of Kevin Rudd, even after he got the backside in 2013, was his capacity to be able to speak more than one language, to be able to continue a conversation, particularly in Chinese communities. Those Chinese communities are very significant in seats like Chisholm in Melbourne, Liberal for a long time, Labor for the past couple of elections. Bennelong, where, of course, with the one exception of Maxine McHugh, basically Liberal, John Howard for decades and decades and decades, John Anderson, took over after, not John Anderson, sorry, the tennis, but John Alexander, there we go, took over after, but now Labor, ever since. The person who's the local MP doesn't look like the population, but you get my point. If the rap keeps being put on the right side of politics that it is only for white people, well, then guess what? There's going to be a world of trouble. The reality is it's not. The reality of the types of candidates that ran for the Liberal Party was very ethnically diverse. There are new faces and new types of people replacing the old faces, particularly when you have a look at some people who came in at this election, including what happened on the Gold Coast, where there was a very different look to the Liberal MP who has been replaced. Of course, the reality is that multi-generation people who have different family histories than those exclusively of parts of Europe are able to rise through Australian society as they should, and as has happened this week, that a bloke who's got Sikh heritage but is as Aussie as you and I is now the Deputy Leader of the Opposition in New South Wales, potentially a Deputy Premier, coming from regional New South Wales. But again, a little further to the wider point that is worth talking about here that Jordan made today in this article. It's a point that I have been making slowly but surely, and if you've been paying attention to all of the editorials we've been doing since the election, this comes up a lot. But I thought it was good to refocus and point you to this particular article. I'll put it up on our socials, but again, go and find it. The headline is there for all to see at skynews.com.au. Now, he turns around and notes here that Australia is also increasingly a nation of renters, as in cities like New York, where people spend their whole life renting, especially in the major metros. ABS data shows 31% of Australians are renters. Home ownership starting to fall. Now, obviously, 1/3 own, 1/3 rent, 1/3 are paying off. Rents continue to climb at 5% last year alone, as do house prices. We are a highly urbanised, highly educated, increasingly locked into expensive housing and increasingly foreign-born. We might not have the bagels or the nightlife, but like New York, we have significant structural problems. As Mandani proved, these trend lines don't just favour the left, they favour the far left. If the right in Australia does not come up with radically effective answers to these problems, someone like a Mamdani will. This is a vital thing for people to think about. Now, the Greens essentially bet their entire strategy at the last federal election on focusing in and around renting. It didn't work because, guess what, 1/3, 2/3. But in some electorates, there's like close to half of people that are renters. So as the Liberal Party starts to think about what it is going to put on as the menu between now and the next election, I agree with Jordan's theory, and it has been my own for a while, that we have to have a serious conversation and we have to offer hope to young people, not just to do what we did because it's always been hard to buy a home, but to understand that it is different than maybe when we bought houses or maybe when our parents bought houses. Does it mean boomers are to blame for everything? No, I hate that stuff. But maybe there's an opportunity to turn around and come up with different types of policies. Things that people will actually see as something that helps them get to the place that they want to go. A perfect example of this is that 5% deposit scheme. It actually was an old Liberal idea, rebadged, polished up, all the rest of it by the current government. But it sends a message that we know you're earning enough money to pay off a mortgage, but we get it that it's too hard to actually end up getting that $100,000 to be able to have as a deposit to buy the 1-2-bedroom unit that you'll be able to get as your first step on the ladder. And while the Liberals are at the lowest of lows right now, they are in a place where they have an opportunity to start to answer these questions. Not to just pretend that because it worked 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 15 elections ago, do more of that. Because, of course, the reality is everything changes. Compassion also is really important. Compassion is not something that can be just owned by the left. It's important that ideas are put forward, and hence why I enjoy the conversations that I have with people like Pauline Hanson about talking about things like income splitting, The idea that if two people are working and you've got a kid, well, rather than you pay this much because you earn this much and you pay this much because you pay a little bit less, you put it all in one pile, you split it in half and your tax goes down. I like these ideas. These are the ideas that I look forward to being part of a conversation in, not leading and saying this is the only way to victory. It ain't church, it's a TV show, I get it. But it's part of what I'll try to talk about with Susan Lee tonight. Now, this means it's not going to make news. It means it's not going to be the breakfast news tomorrow. It's not going to be the news of the day. But I'm going to have lots of chats over the next little while about some different ideas. If you've got them, if you read them, if you see things like what Jordan wrote today, send them to me, paul@skynews.com.au. Well done. Nice article. All right. Now, let's turn our attention to what does retirement look like in 2025? That far right-wing group, the Australian Bureau of Statistics, came out today with some really interesting data. And it was about what retirement and retirement intentions were like in 2025. I wish I had my glasses here, but I've got to squint. 156,000 people aged over the age of 45 retired in the past 12 months. There are now a total of 4.5 million people over the age of 45 who have retired or are retired in Australia. The average age at retirement in Australia is now 57.3 years. What's really interesting about that is, remember, of course, you can't get your super until your 60s, right? So what are we doing in that little gap? This is why maybe, again, an opportunity for the coalition is to work about this idea where, okay, you're going to retire from full-time work, but maybe you're not going to punish people while they're on part pensions or the rest of it from 57 to their mid-60s or late 60s when you can start to get your super. The average age of people 45 years and over to retire is now 65.6 years. And the government pension remains the most common source of income for retirees. Why? Because, of course, super only kicked in the early sort of mid-90s, meaning that we're sort of getting to the point now where more people retire with super than not. But let's have a look at the number of people who are retired. In New South Wales, it is about a quarter of the population, actually a little bit higher, 1.4 million. Victoria, 1.1 million. Queensland, about 1 million. Western Australia, very low numbers there, in fact, less than 40%. South Australia, again, less than 40%. About 50% of the voting or working age population is now retired in Tasmania, lower in the ACT, and the ones least likely to be retired are our mates doing the hard yakka in the Northern Territory. Why people retire is really interesting as well here. Again, I wish I had my glasses to squint here, but we'll do our best. Okay, left-hand side of this, people who were retrenched. Blue, 2018, red, 2024-25. Basically the same number of people. There has not been a spike. There has been a spike, however, in the second category, which is people who decided to retire due to illness or injury. That has increased in the past couple of years. Basically the same number, again, when people have left their last job and they've said, that's it, don't flip the bails. But as you can see, the total is that there has been an increase, not just in population, but again in percentages about those who have retired. I'm saying all of this because if you are somebody who's recently retired, let's compare how your life is to other people's. The source of retirement income now for men and women, majority of which, the best part, is more than 40%, is the age pension. There is about 30-something, 35% of blokes are on superannuation, women, because of participation in the workforce due to families. That's more likely to be the mid-20s. People with no personal income whatsoever, it's about 5%, but I don't know how that retirement exists and what you're doing. Or no pension at all when it comes to women, or no personal income, I should say, when it comes to women. That small number of less than 5% is the blokes, but about just under 20% women. Are you in that cadre where you're not getting super, you're not getting the pension? How do you exist? Send me the email, paul@skynews.com.au. And as you can see, the amount of superannuation as the years have rolled on has gone from the average being somewhere between $200,000 and $300,000 now to almost $400,000 that comes as people move their way towards retirement and how they end up paying for it as they go. I should mention that our mates in Darwin as well, there's a cyclone which is on its way in the next little while. This is something that, of course, we deeply care about. We make sure that everyone is across their weather and their weather situations. I don't say any of this about climate change, and somebody sent me some email about that before. No, I mentioned this because if anyone's in danger, I want people to know, and if this is the only way they get their news, I want them to know that right now there's a cyclone that's getting bigger and is currently on its way towards Darwin. Here is what is being said to people who might be watching us anywhere near the top end tonight.
What we should do, firstly, is make sure that you have a plan for your family that includes what you are going to do should the cyclone make landfall here. You should consider that there are shelters across Darwin, but the general advice in Darwin is that most of our buildings are built to code now, and that the safest place for you to do is to actually stay in your residential home.
We love you guys. Beautiful part of the world. Looking forward to visiting again for our town next year, maybe in and around the 1st of July, hence the fireworks of which you've seen. I love Cracker Night. I love Territory Day. Let us hope that everyone is okay and will be there for it in 6 months, 7 months, 8 months from now, because they'll be okay in the next 6, 7 or 8 days. All right, hump day. Thankfully now you're starting to work and earning money for you, not just paying your taxes. So showbiz for ugly people means the taxpayer-funded people who run the joint also have taxpayer-funded staffers to produce taxpayer-funded crap like this on social media.
I know everyone's talking about 6767 at the moment, but how about the fact that Australia's billionaires are earning $67,000 an hour?
What does that mean? There's this Labor MP, I believe she's the member for Reid, yet again finding a way to exercise her way to your attention. Whether you complete it or not, I mean, is that cheap medicine? Again, I just love this stuff. All of this stuff has already passed the parliament. Just bang, 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 bang. This is the stuff they're punching out each and every day. And then, of course, there's a cabinet minister. This is what they do with your money.
Some things just go together, like hummus and bread, and super and pay.
Dear God. Anyway, you keep working hard because they're hardly working.